So many animals, so little time. I just shot my deer about an hour ago, and now I'm gearing up to go after some sharp tails and prairie chickens up on the hills. Got him. Out of all the game birds that I've hunted in North America, they're all beautiful in their own right. They're all different, but it's just amazing the colorations and the designs on their feathers. They're all just gorgeous, gorgeous birds, and these prairie chickens are special. Doing this without a dog is a pretty daunting task, but to get one bird, for me, that's a big deal. So I got this beautiful chicken, and tomorrow is all about the turkeys.
You know, Nebraska is kind of a sleeper as a hunting state, and I know a couple people that live here and they get mad when I say anything. They're like, don't tell anyone, it's the best kept secret. But this actually topped off my day. Last night I snuck on a flock of chickens that were out feeding in a pasture and managed to get 3 birds, which is a daily limit. But like I said, that topped off my day. I actually shot 2 turkeys yesterday, one that looks like a Rio hybrid, and the other one had a white banded tail, which most people would call them a Merriam's. And before that, before we had time to even start turkey hunting, we were actually hunting, looking for deer, and found a great whitetail buck. We drove into a cut cornfield, and I was glassing, and I found a doe on the edge of the trees. So we looked into the dark recess of those trees, and I could see the chin of a deer and the white throat patch. And closer inspection, of course, found white beams, antlers were sticking out. Put the spotting scope on him. He was looking right at us. We could tell that he was well outside his ears on both sides. And then he conveniently turned his head, and we got a good point count. We had 5 on each side, good height. And at that point, it was like, we don't have to go look for any more deer. We're making our play on this one. It was a pretty stellar day when you can shoot a whitetail that's wider than 21 inches, and 2 turkeys, and 3 prairie chickens, and I actually even had a chance at a pheasant, which would have really been a bonus, but I have no complaints. This is what Nebraska is, and I've enjoyed its bounty and beautiful habitat for several years. This is my 6th trip in a row to this region, and I sure hope to come back again in the future.
Doesn't matter whether it's spring or fall, turkeys are frustrating. That was a cool little stalk we just tried to put on them, but it didn't work out. They just weren't having the calling and the decoys. It got their attention, but not enough to bring them in. Just those 3 gobblers. So we saw 2 other flocks of turkeys in the area. This is a common place. It's kind of a funnel that they go through. They hang out in this field and pick around, and now we're set up in a ground blind, got a couple decoys out, so hopefully they just move through, and we're just gonna sit here for a couple hours and see what happens. Well, I put a stalk on those turkeys and finally it came together and they're all bunched up, so thankfully I wasn't shooting a shotgun because I never would have had a shot, but at the same time I shot my crossbow and thought it was a good hit, looked like a good hit. He bled like crazy, but a lot of times you hit a turkey with an arrow and a broadhead, it takes them a minute to die, and sometimes they can go a long ways. So he ended up running down to this river bottom here, heck of a blood trail, but then he flew across and I heard some crashing, so I think we're gonna have to go across and take a look and just do a body search. All right, fall turkey. You know, people often give turkey a rap for being a heck of a lot easier than deer, but I'll tell you, this fall turkey hunting, when they're all grouped up, it really presents a challenge in itself. I probably had to grind harder to get a turkey on this trip than I did to get my mule deer. But this is a really nice hen, and Thanksgiving's coming up, so I think I'm gonna pluck her and roast her whole or maybe smoke her or something like that. And I'm just excited to have one of these Nebraska turkeys on the ground in the month of November. That's pretty neat. So I'm pretty confident that that turkey didn't make it, but like I said before, sometimes they can go a pretty good distance when they take an arrow, depending on where it hits them. You know, there's only so many vitals in a turkey and they take up a pretty small area, but now we had to cross the river and we're traversing this really steep edge to just try to see if we can find that turkey lying here somewhere. Yeah, so as you can see, shot him across this river, and it's not no small creek. This isn't something that you can just wade across. So we had to go drive all the way around to get here and trail up this turkey, but he flew a pretty good distance. And I did hear a crash when he landed over on this bank. So I was hoping that meant something for the better, for the recovery. And sure enough, it did. He was laying right down here on this bank, just a few feet away from the river. So it's also a miracle that, you know, when he died, he didn't start flopping and go into the river. So I'm grateful that I was able to recover this bird. And for this country, he's a nice long beard.
Yeah, so ranching anymore is pretty challenging just to ranch alone, especially for a young guy to kind of get started in it. So, you know, I first moved back, I tried to figure out something I could do to bring in some extra income besides just here on the ranch. You know, the hunting was something I loved to do, and we had plenty of wildlife here, so it's kind of something I've tried to grow, and hopefully it'll be something that, you know, someday we can pass on down to the kids and give them an opportunity to be able to live out here and raise a family.
So one of the things I like to do when I'm somewhere and shoot some wild game and eat it in camp is to actually pair it with some local stuff. So we found this seasoning at the gas station. It's from a guy in Nebraska. And then also got some red wine over here, a couple different varieties from the Niobrara Valley Vineyards. So we're gonna use that to go with the venison, but we're also gonna do this wild turkey in a combination of the local seasoning with some crushed Fritos, something I've never done before, but it's just a lot like using cornmeal, so it should work out pretty well. So when you're frying any kind of wild turkey, the best thing you can do is at least make sure all the meat has an even consistency or an even thickness. So what I like to do is use a meat tenderizer. When I don't have one, I'll just use my fists and I'll pound out the meat so all the strips are about the same size. Another thing that's good to do is, if you can, try to cut them and get them ready in a way that when folks eat them, they're actually eating with the grain, so that it'll pull apart nicely and it's not going to be tough for them. So if you have long strips, let's say it's running this way, you want the grain to be this way, so when people eat that strip, the meat just comes apart nice and easy and the texture's good. So one of the things I like to do to make sure the oil's ready, especially if you're cooking on a stovetop that's not yours at home or one you're not used to, sometimes it can be a little bit finicky with the temperature and whether you got gas or electric or what type of pan you have. When you're not comfortable with it, it's difficult to gauge how fast things are going to get hot or how even the heating is. So when you're heating oil, what I like to do is just drop in a little bit of breading if you're frying something, And if it starts to sizzle when it hits the oil, that means that oil is probably ready. When it comes to the meat, it's always good to let it sit out so it gets to about room temperature before you drop it in the oil, because you drop in cold meat to hot oil, that's when you're going to get a lot of the splash up. It's also going to take the meat longer to cook. It's going to cook uneven, and it's just not going to be a good experience. And honestly, you could start a fire if you do it wrong, so you just want to be careful about that. One of the biggest mistakes people make with wild turkey is overcooking it. And you know, it's not like chicken where you have salmonella. You actually want the wild turkey to be a little bit pink on the inside. So also remember that after you pull it off, it's going to continue cooking a little bit from the heat from the outside that's still working its way to the inside. So if anything, pull it off a little bit early. It's not going to hurt you one bit. I'm also firing up some back straps here from my mule deer, and with a back strap you just really don't need to do a whole lot. They're already such a good cut of meat. But I'm kind of going back to my standby coffee rub. I typically add a couple more ingredients that I don't have here, but you don't need to do much. So what I'll do is salt and pepper and a little bit of Folgers, just don't overdo it. And as I've mentioned before, K-cup from a Keurig actually works better because it's more fine ground, but this Folgers will do just fine as long as you don't overdo it. Gives it a little bit of earthy, smoky flavor when you flash fry it or grill it. Biggest thing you don't want to do with any meat when you're frying it is overcrowd it. When you overcrowd it, it doesn't fry, it actually steams, and that's when it'll get kind of tough and rubbery. So make sure you got enough pan space. That's why I'm only going to do 3 at a time. I could fit all these in there, but I'm not going to, because if you do that, they're actually going to steam each other, and then you're not going to get the texture that you want. They're going to be rubbery and they're going to be kind of gray. You want them to just be nice and seared and have that good color. And as soon as they start to bleed through is generally when you want to flip them. So you can see that it doesn't take very long. With these pieces right here, they're already starting to bleed through. So flip them, good to go.